Now, if that weren't enough, Jesus himself will command Peter at the end of the Gospel of St. John to feed my sheep. Now, if that wasn't enough, even the word pastor is the Latin word shepherd. But there's more. Jesus is the good shepherd, and he has delegated this work to the church, to specific individuals to carry that work forward. And so we find in the New Testament not only the word pastor, but we find the word elders. And you probably think, well, that refers to the vestry. No, they didn't have vestries till 16 centuries later in England. But anyway, elder comes from the Greek word presbytera, from which you get presbyter, from which you get priest. And so when you hear about pastors, shepherds, elders refers to priests. It can also refer sometimes to bishops. There's a separate Greek word in the New Testament, episkopoi. They're in there too. Now there's one more step in this analysis. This morning we also have this reading from the 34th chapters of the prophet Ezekiel. And toward the end of the Old Testament, you start hearing a lot of negative things about the shepherds and the priests who aren't doing their jobs. And what it boils down to is they are not taking care of the sheep. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not the shepherds take care of the flock? And it goes on in some detail. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. And you have ruled them harshly and brutally. And there's a great deal of complaining about this. So today we have not only the positive stuff, but also the negative that shows us how they don't want the shepherds to be. Now, let's bring this image forward into the present. The Good Shepherd loves the sheep so much that he's willing to go into the wilderness to find the one that is lost. And one of the very best examples I've heard of this sort of commitment to the lost comes out of 9/11, when we had that terrible day when the terrorists destroyed the World Trade Center. And I don't know how you reacted, but I distinctly remember driving along and hearing the announcer say, well, the first tower has fallen, and I yelled at the radio, that's impossible. I did, because I couldn't believe it. And so we saw those 210-story buildings just collapse, and they collapsed into piles of rubble that were 6 stories tall. And I'm going to quote now from a book where this incident was written about. Even before the dust settled, the heroic effort began as thousands of people systematically started combing through the debris to find the survivors. And one rescuer told how he climbed down into a hole in the twisted steel and rubble, extending his arm when he couldn't go any further with a flashlight to peer into the darkness. When out of the darkness, a hand reached out and grabbed him. And he almost dropped his flashlight. He was so startled. But he did it. He reached back with his other arm to grab hold of the guy behind him, who grabbed the one behind them. And so a human chain was formed that slowly pulled that man out of the debris to safety. Now, that's really a pretty neat story about being saved out of the midst of terrible disaster. And you and I have found ourselves in the midst of a different sort of disaster, but one that's equally horrible. And I had a number of reactions to Katrina, and one of them is that I've been startled by how many people we've lost since the storm. And a number of these people were really terrific in many ways. They had enormous strengths. But they got to a point where they just said, I can't do this. And I didn't begrudge any of them that, and off they went. But I've been equally amazed since the storm at the number of churches and individuals who've come forward from the farthest reaches of the country to help us. And I continue to get checks and notes from them, and people telling me they're still praying for us. And I have been very, very moved by that. And remember now, when God's chosen people are wandering through the desert, trying to get to the promised land, they didn't get cards and letters. They didn't get checks in the mail. They had to completely rely on the goodness of God to get them through that. And this week, as the old church was lifted high in the air, I feel like someone reached down and lifted me up. That was really cool. And I was amazed at how effortless it was. You know, engineers do all sorts of amazing things, and oh yeah, they're engineers, so what? But this was cool, because, you know, they had these 10 pneumatic jacks, and the guy went over and goes, boop, and pushes one button, and it all goes, shh. And 66 tons of, you didn't know it weighed that much, did you? 66 tons of Trinity Church just goes up in the air about 60 inches, and then they rearrange everything, and they do it again. And it's just, that is so cool. I have a better attitude about engineers now. So. You can badmouth the philosophy department later. Now, spiritually, you know, this business of being lifted up, I don't know what it did for you, but it reminds me that God is involved in this process. God is leading us back to some kind of promised land. Jesus has promised to be with us always, and he's done his part. He has been with us through this.